Welcome back, my dear friends. Thank you for joining me again tonight. Find a cozy spot, relax your shoulders, and let the world outside grow quiet for a little while. Here, on this channel, we share calm stories every day. Stories to help you drift into rest. Stories that carry you gently into sleep. And stories that let your imagination breathe. If you enjoy these peaceful journeys, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps this little bedtime corner grow, and it means more to me than you know. Now, let's take a deep breath together and begin tonight's story. Long before the world had maps, before borders were lines on paper, before deserts were crossed by engines and satellites, there was a king who believed no land could deny him. His name was Cambyses II, the son of Cyrus the Great, ruler of the Persian Empire, a kingdom so vast that even the stars seemed smaller than its reach. Yet somewhere far to the west, beyond mountains, beyond dunes, beyond the shimmering horizon, stood a land he could not control. A land whispered about in smoky taverns and written in careful lines on old papyrus. The Oracle of Ammon, a sacred temple at the edge of the world. And it was said, softly, privately, carefully, that this oracle did not bow to the King of Kings. Cambyses could not tolerate that. And so, one warm morning, under a sky the color of polished bronze, he summoned an army of 50,000 Persian soldiers and sent them marching into the greatest desert on earth, not knowing that they would never return. The city of Thebes, the beginning of the march, the army began their journey in the Egyptian city of Thebes, where the Nile flowed calmly and palm trees swayed in the warm breeze. The soldiers gathered near the riverbank, shields polished, spears glinting, faces steady and proud. Some were young men with dreams of glory. Others were older, their armor worn, their eyes carrying stories they no longer told. The people of Thebes watched silently as the vast army assembled. There was admiration in their eyes, but also fear. For no army had ever crossed the deep desert beyond Thebes and returned whole. Some villagers whispered warnings. Some prayed quietly. Some shook their heads, already mourning men still breathing. But the soldiers did not see this. They heard only their orders. They trusted only their king. And they marched. The road to the dunes. The first days were easy. The desert was kind at its edges, warm, golden, scattered with green valleys and little springs hiding in the sand. At night, the soldiers slept beneath a sky so filled with stars that the heavens looked like a spilled basket of diamonds. They laughed around fires. They shared bread and water. They sang songs of home. Their confidence was unshakable. For how could 50,000 men vanish when marching together? How could the desert swallow an entire army? It seemed impossible. But the desert does not measure size the way humans do. The signs they ignored on the fourth day, the sand changed. The ground beneath their feet felt softer, looser, like walking on breathing earth. The wind grew sharper. The horizon shimmered strangely, as though the world were melting into the sky. A few soldiers noticed small whirlwinds forming in the distance, spirals of dust rising like thin pillars before dissolving. A seasoned scout approached the commander. "General, perhaps we should wait. The desert is restless." The general shook his head. "The king has commanded us." And so they marched on, even when the wind began to hum like a low voice, even when the sand grew hot enough to burn through sandals, even when the sky dimmed slightly, as though something unseen was drifting between the sun and their path. The desert of the gods. On the seventh day, they reached a place the local tribes called the Desert of the Gods, a vast, endless plain where even the Bedouin feared to wander. The dunes were enormous, taller than city walls, shaped by centuries of wind. They rose and fell like an ocean frozen in time. The soldiers began to feel small, very small. The wind whispered through the dunes with a strange, haunting tone, as if memories lived within the sand. Some men claimed they heard voices carried by the wind. Others said they saw distant shapes walking along the dunes at night, vanishing when approached. But these were dismissed as tricks of exhaustion. And still, they marched deeper. The first vanishings on the 9th night, a group of soldiers camped near a tall dune. Before dawn, a sentry went to wake them. But the blankets were empty. No footprints in the sand. No signs of struggle. The desert floor was smooth, untouched. It was as if the men had faded into the night air. The officers ordered silence. Wind, they said. Shifting sands, they insisted. They simply wandered off. But everyone knew that men do not simply vanish without a sound when sleeping side by side. Still, no one turned back. The wind begins to howl. On the 12th day, the wind changed. It no longer whispered. It howled. It rose in sudden bursts, pushing sand sideways like waves. It stung their eyes, their skin, their lungs. Some men tied cloth around their faces. Others lowered their heads and trudged forward, step by heavy step. Their water began to run low. The mules struggled. The heat grew unbearable. But the king's order echoed louder than their fear. Destroy the oracle of Ammon. Show the world that Persia bows to no god. And so they pressed on, even as the dunes grew sharper, even as the wind sounded like a creature breathing, even as the desert felt too quiet between gusts, too watchful. The last oasis. They reached a small oasis on the 13th day. A cluster of tired palms. A pool the size of a bath. Just enough water to give them one last breath. The soldiers drank slowly, silently, as if the desert might punish them for taking even that. A young soldier looked up at the stars that night. He whispered, "Will we make it home?" His older companion placed a hand on his shoulder. "We are 50,000 strong," he said softly. "The desert cannot take us all." But he said it without conviction, because even he had begun to feel that the sand was watching them and waiting. The morning the sky disappeared, on the 14th day, just as the sun began to rise, the sky vanished. A wall of sand as tall as a mountain, moving faster than horses could run, roared across the horizon. A sandstorm unlike anything they had ever seen. The desert had finally spoken, and the army was still deep inside it. The desert did not simply storm that day. It moved, it rose, it marched. It approached the army like a living thing, a towering shape made of dust, heat, and ancient wrath. The Persians had seen sandstorms before, but this one was different. This storm had a shape, a presence, a sound like thousands of drums. It was not weather anymore. It was something the desert had been saving for centuries. Something it would use to claim 50,000 souls. The first breath of the storm at first. There was only a strange glow on the horizon, a faint reddish gold mist rising where the sun should have been. A scout rubbed his eyes. He blinked. The glow grew taller. "General," he whispered, "the sky is gone." The general stepped forward. He shaded his eyes and froze. It looked like a mountain of sand rolling toward them. Not blowing, not drifting, moving, breathing. The wind shifted, cutting sideways, bringing with it a deep humming sound, a vibration that rattled teeth and clenched hearts. The desert was waking. "Close the ranks," the general shouted orders. "Close the ranks, shields up, protect the water mules, tie down the tents." Soldiers scrambled, driving poles into the ground, covering their mouths with cloth, clutching their shields as the wind began to howl. But they were preparing for a storm, and this was something else. The mules screamed. The horses kicked sand and pulled against their reins. The sky flickered. The wind roared louder. A soldier looked up and whispered a prayer to Ahura Mazda. "Protect us from what walks in the sand. The storm arrives. The wall of sand hit with the force of a collapsing mountain. It struck the front lines first, hurling soldiers backward, burying shields, shredding tents, lifting entire packs into the air like weightless leaves. Sand poured into mouths, eyes, ears, armor, boots. The air turned solid. Men could not see even their hands in front of their faces. The wind screamed with such power that shouts disappeared instantly, swallowed by the humming roar of the storm's heart. It was as though the desert had decided to erase sound itself. A darkness that felt alive. When the main body of the storm arrived, the world went black. Not dim, not shadowed, black. A darkness thick enough to feel with fingertips. A darkness that swallowed torches and snuffed out fire. Some soldiers held hands to avoid being separated. Others crouched low to the ground, clutching their cloaks around their faces, breathing in tiny gasps as sand pressed against them from every direction. A young soldier screamed, "I can't see, I can't breathe." But his voice was lost in the choking wind. Somewhere nearby, a commander shouted, "Stay low, stay together." But no one knew where he stood. Even sound had no direction. The desert splits the army. The storm tore the army apart without mercy. Entire lines of soldiers were pushed sideways and swallowed by dunes forming in real time. Groups disappeared as if snatched by giant unseen hands. Horses ran blindly, vanishing into the storm. Men crawled on their bellies trying to find shelter, only to be buried by sand sliding like liquid from above. Some soldiers tried to follow the general's banner, but the banner was ripped from his grip and carried upward into the darkness. A final symbol swallowed whole. The desert splits the army. The storm tore the army apart without mercy. Entire lines of soldiers were pushed sideways and swallowed by dunes forming in real time. Groups disappeared as if snatched by giant unseen hands. Horses ran blindly, vanishing into the storm. Men crawled on their bellies trying to find shelter, only to be buried by sand sliding like liquid from above. Some soldiers tried to follow the general's banner, but the banner was ripped from his grip and carried upward into the darkness. A final symbol swallowed whole. The whispering in the wind. At the height of the storm, some soldiers reported hearing whispers carried through the wind. Soft voices, unfamiliar voices, speaking in languages older than Persia, older than Egypt, older than memory. Do you hear that? A terrified man cried. His companion nodded, eyes wide with horror. "It's not the wind," he whispered. "It's the desert, speaking." But the desert was not speaking. It was claiming. The storm lasts too long. A normal desert storm might last an hour, perhaps two, but this one did not ease. It hammered the land for an entire day, then a second, then a third. Sand built upon sand until the world itself seemed made of shifting dunes. Where the army once stood, there were now hills as tall as towers. Where their tents had been, there were valleys carved by the furious wind. The desert was reshaping itself around the men it consumed, as if covering its tracks, as if hiding what it had taken, the survivors. And the vanished. When the storm finally began to weaken, only a fraction of the army was still conscious. Some men crawled onto new dunes, coughing, eyes red and swollen. Their armor was filled with sand. Their clothes were torn. Their lips were dry and cracked. They looked around and saw nothing. No banners, no tents, no water mules, no footprints. Just a vast, endless plain of newly piled sand stretching as far as the eye could see. "Where is everyone?" A soldier asked, trembling. Another whispered, "They're buried." But even he did not understand the truth. The desert had not merely buried them. It had taken them. And the worst was still coming. The storm had passed, but it left behind a silence that felt heavier than the roaring wind itself. A silence so complete, so consuming, that even breathing seemed too loud. The few surviving soldiers blinked through stinging eyes, trying to understand what remained of their world. The desert was unrecognizable. Where there had once been flat plains, there were now mountains of sand so tall that their peaks shimmered against the pale sky. Where there had been paths, there were none. Where there had been tracks, they had vanished. The storm had done what no army could. It erased everything. The survivors waked slowly. The surviving men crawled out from shallow pockets of sand where they had taken shelter. Their faces were gray with dust, their lips cracked, their clothes shredded by the storm's claws. Some staggered to their feet. Others remained on their knees, confused, dizzy, trying to understand how the world could change so completely in just a few days. One soldier coughed violently, sand spilling from his throat. Another wiped his eyes and whispered hoarsely, "Where? Where is the army?" No one answered, because there was no army anymore. Only them, a few hundred men, standing in the middle of a landscape that looked nothing like the one they entered. Searching for footprints, finding none. The general, tired, sunburnt, his voice barely more than a whisper, gathered the men he could find. "We will search," he said softly. "We must find the others." But when they walked, their feet left only temporary marks on dunes shaped by shifting winds. The storm had piled sand, so deep and so uneven that it was impossible to recognize the original ground. The men searched for banners. They found none. They searched for weapons, shields, broken tent poles, a scrap of cloth, anything. But the desert had swallowed every trace, as though 50,000 soldiers had never existed. Strange shapes in the sand. As the sun rose higher, the desert shimmered with heat. The survivors squinted as they noticed dark shapes ahead, half buried in the dunes. Bodies? Someone whispered. They rushed forward, hearts pounding, only to discover the shapes were boulders or sand formations twisted by the storm. Nothing human at all. Just the desert playing tricks on tired eyes. But one man sank to his knees and punched the ground. "It's hiding them," he whispered. "The desert is hiding them." Another murmured, "No, the desert has claimed them." The soldiers fell silent, because something about that felt true. The dunes began to move later that afternoon. A strange sound emerged, a long, low rumble like thunder trapped underground. The men stilled. The desert beneath their feet was shifting again. A dune in the distance collapsed inward, as though something large had pulled it down from beneath. Another dune slid sideways, creating a ripple that traveled across the sand like a wave on water. It was mesmerizing, beautiful, terrifying. One soldier whispered, "This desert is alive." And in that moment, no one disagreed. Heat like a living hand. As the sun reached its highest point, the heat became unbearable. It pressed on their skin like a physical weight, thick, smothering, heavy as stone. Their breath felt hot, as though they were inhaling fire. Shadows shimmered and twisted on the sand. Mirages appeared, lakes, palm trees, shimmering cool water just beyond reach. The youngest soldier ran toward one. "Water! There's water!" Two men caught him before he reached the edge of a dune. "That's not water," one whispered gently. "It's the heat." The boy collapsed, sobbing. "We will die out here," he said. "We will die like the rest." But no one corrected him. The promise of the oracle, the general, exhausted and hollow-eyed, forced himself to stand tall. "The oracle," he said. "We march to the oracle of Ammon. If we reach it, we reach water, shelter, people." Some soldiers nodded, desperate for direction. Others stared blankly at the dunes. A young man whispered, "Isn't that why we came? To destroy it?" The general looked at him, his voice barely steady. "We were ordered to destroy it," he said quietly. "But now, we seek it for salvation." The irony hung in the heat-soaked air. The very temple they came to silence was now their only hope of survival. A desert without mercy. The men began walking again, slowly, painfully, with cloth wrapped tightly around their mouths to keep sand from filling their lungs. Every step was effort, every breath a battle. Some men collapsed and did not rise again. Others knelt beside them, weeping softly. The desert did not stop, did not soften, did not care. It simply shifted, wind carving new shapes, hiding old ones, burying everything. From high above, one might have seen a few dark specks moving across endless dunes, but from the ground, the men felt like the last people alive on a planet of sand. Night falls like a curtain. When night finally came, it came suddenly, as if someone had pulled a dark veil across the sky. The air grew cold. The stars emerged, sharp and brilliant, scattered across the heavens like frost on black stone. The men lay together on the dunes, huddling for warmth, listening to the faint hiss of shifting sand. One soldier whispered, "Do you think the desert will let us live?" The general closed his eyes. "I think," he said softly, "the desert decides who it keeps." The men shivered, though not from the cold. A glow in the distance. Just before dawn, a faint light appeared far across the dunes. Small, golden, unmoving, the soldiers stared, breathless. "A campfire?" one whispered. "A settlement?" another hoped. The general's eyes widened. Perhaps the oracle. Hope sparked in their chests, the first hope, since the storm began. They rose, weak but determined. The desert watched silently as they made their way toward the light. But the desert was not done with them. Not yet. The faint golden glow in the distance kept the men moving long after their exhausted bodies wanted to collapse. It flickered softly, like a small fire, steady and welcoming in the vast, cold desert. Some soldiers whispered prayers. Others held their breath. Even the general, who had forced himself to stay strong for so many days, felt the tremble of hope rise in his tired chest. But hope in the desert is a fragile thing, and sometimes it is only a mirage, chasing the light as dawn spread slowly across the dunes. The golden glow remained visible, a silent promise suspended on the horizon. The men trudged toward it, sand slipping beneath their feet, the cold morning air stinging their faces. When they reached the top of a tall dune, they saw it clearly. A small cluster of palm trees, walls made of stone, columns rising like pale shadows in the early light. The men gasped. "It's real," a soldier whispered. "The oracle." Someone said, weeping. The general nodded, voice trembling. "Move, slowly. Stay together." They descended toward the settlement. But as they approached, as the sand leveled out, as the palms came into focus, the general's steps slowed. Something was wrong. A temple without people, the oracle of Ammon, stood silent and empty. The fire they had seen from afar was not a fire at all. Only the sun reflecting off a broken bronze basin on the temple roof. The settlement gates hung half open, creaking softly in the breeze. No guards, no priests, no animals, no footprints. The place felt abandoned or waiting. The men walked through the gates, hearts pounding, not with hope, but with unease. Inside, the silence was deep, a kind of silence that feels almost unnatural. It wrapped around the men like a cold presence. Even the birds were absent. Even the wind seemed to pause when passing through the columns. A soft whisper escaped one soldier. "This place is wrong." The oracle speaks without sound. The general approached the central chamber, a round hall with a domed ceiling painted in ancient colors. At the center stood the shrine of the oracle, empty, silent, dusty. No priest, no scroll, no sacred flame. But as the men stepped closer, they felt something, a faint pressure in the air, like the hush before a distant whisper. A few soldiers knelt unconsciously. Others bowed their heads. One young man frowned. "I hear something," he murmured. "A voice, but not with my ears." Another nodded slowly. I feel it. Inside my chest. The general closed his eyes. It wasn't a voice in words. It was more like a feeling. Turn back. You have come too far. His heart thudded. Was it the gods? The desert? His own fear? He could not tell. But the message was unmistakable. The desert's last warning. The general stepped outside again, squinting at the dunes. The sky was clearer now, but the horizon shimmered the same way it had before the great storm. He knew that look. Something else was coming. He turned to the men. We rest today, he whispered. Then we marched back to Thebes. A few cried with relief. Others sank to their knees, exhausted. They believed they could make it home. They believed the worst was behind them. But the desert had not yet taken what it came for. The second storm just past noon. A distant rumble echoed across the dunes. The men froze. The general felt his blood turn cold. The horizon darkened again, but not with night, with sand. Another storm, even larger than the first. A wall of swirling darkness stretching across the desert like a living titan. The men panicked. To the temple, the general shouted. Take shelter. They ran back inside the oracle complex, crowding into halls and chambers, shivering as the wind began to moan again. But the storm outside did not simply howl. It growled, a deep, thunderous sound that shook the stone columns. The men clung to one another, clinging to hope, clinging to life. But even stone cannot withstand the desert's fury forever. The temple collapses. The storm struck with terrifying force, hammering the temple walls, tearing at roofs, shattering stone. Columns cracked, ceilings groaned. Dust poured down like gray rain. The men screamed, but their voices vanished in the roaring wind. The general shouted, "Stay low, cover your faces." But his words dissolved into the storm's wrath. Walls began to crumble. Beams split. Rooms collapsed inward, burying men under tons of falling stone and sand. Those who tried to flee outside were swallowed instantly, their silhouettes erased by the swirling storm. The temple, their last hope, was being devoured. One chamber after another fell into ruin. Soon there was nothing left. Just sand, just wind, just silence. The desert had claimed its offering. After the sand settled, it took days for the storm to die. When it finally calmed, what remained was breathtakingly empty. The settlement? Gone. Not a stone visible. The temple? Gone. Buried beneath dunes. The army? Gone. Every single one. The desert looked untouched, smooth, quiet, innocent, as though it had not swallowed 50,000 souls. Travelers who passed months later reported nothing but endless sand. No weapons. No horses. No pottery. No bones. Nothing. The desert kept its secret well. The mystery across time word eventually reached the court of Cambyses II. The king waited eagerly for news of his victorious army. But days turned to weeks. Weeks turned to months, and no soldier returned. No messenger, no scout, no survivor. The king of Persia was forced to accept a truth impossible to understand. His entire army had vanished, swallowed without a trace. For centuries afterward, Egyptian guides told the story as a warning. Travelers spoke of whispers in the dunes. Nomads claimed the winds still carried the voices of the lost soldiers at night. And historians agreed. It was the greatest disappearance in military history. Even today, archaeologists search the deep desert valleys, still finding nothing. As if the earth itself sealed the memory of the army in a silent grave of shifting sand. And so the desert keeps its secrets under the moonlight. The dunes glow soft and pale, silent, still, sleeping. No footprints remain, no voices echo, no story is complete. Only the desert knows where the army lies, deep beneath the sand, in a place untouched by time, in a tomb built not by human hands, but by the wind itself. And so the legend endures. 50,000 soldiers left Thebes, but none ever returned. The desert took them, and the desert never gives back what it claims. Thank you so much for spending this quiet moment with me tonight. I hope this story brought you comfort and helped your mind settle into soft, gentle rest. If you enjoyed this bedtime journey, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a calming comment below. I read every one of them, and your words truly warm my heart. I upload peaceful stories every day, so whenever you need a place to unwind, you're always welcome here. Until we meet again, my friend, I wish you a beautiful night, a peaceful sleep, and the sweetest dreams.